Welcome to AUA Leadership in Business, an official podcast of the American Urological Association.
Welcome to the AUA Leadership in Business podcast, where urologic professionals experience the practical application of business acumen essential to successfully navigating today's rapidly changing business environment. I'm Dr. Jennifer Miles Thomas, and in today's episode, we will discuss the basis of investing for retirement and review some of the most common mistakes people make. Joining me today for this discussion is Dr. David Kanz. Dr. Kanz is Associate Professor of Urology at Beth Israel Lahey Clinic. He gravitates towards topics that improve the lives of fellow physicians and financial wellness as one of his favorites. He has been on the virtual Grand Round circuit around the country, spreading financial knowledge to help alleviate the stress that this can create. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's fantastic to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. Given the current economic climate, this is a topic that is right on schedule. So for someone currently in the practice of medicine, in the practice of urology, why should you start planning for retirement now?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite topics. To some degree, a lot of us are procrastinators, and this is one arena where you're severely penalized for procrastinating. So, there's this thing called compound interest, and it's this magical mathematic phenomenon where your interest also earns interest. And so if you leave your money to invest over decades, there can be substantial growth. But if you delay investing, you don't get to participate in this phenomenon. It's sort of like if you're a little kid and you're at your childhood home and you plant a seed of a tree in the front lawn and it looks like nothing's happening, and then 40 years later, you drive by the house as an adult and you're like, holy cow, there's this massive tree there. I planted that. Retirement investing is sort of like that. And so even for the residents listening, if you can contribute to your retirement savings just a little bit every month, it really can add up over decades.
That makes sense. I think during residency, most of us were concerned with survival. And so this is one of the other aspects we should be paying attention. So even a small amount, given the number of years, would make a huge difference.
Yeah. So even if the residents could find a way to set aside $100 a month into a Roth IRA, for example, and not touch it, 35, 40 years later, that could be a significant chunk of change, depending on what the market does. Let's say somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000. That's nothing to sneeze at. Every little bit matters, even if it seems like a small amount.
No, that makes complete sense. I think just the information and the education is important so that even the small, $100 is $100, but I think most people can figure out a way to save that monthly and to get to $100,000 or $200,000 at the time of retirement. Anything will help. Okay, so
yeah, I was just going to add, we have to sort of trick ourselves. So if you start this plan as a resident of setting aside $100 a month and you never see that money, then you won't get used to it as something that's available to you.
Right. That's one of the things we talk about, just increasing our lifestyle as our salary increases. But what you're saying is if you have that set point a little bit lower than what you're bringing in, you'll never miss it.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, why do you think that retirement planning can be intimidating for physicians? We're fairly intelligent, so why do we have this barrier with regard to retirement?
Well, let me answer that in a way that maybe brings it home for doctors and urologists specifically. I'm just going to take you back to a medical situation. When I was, I think, a second year or very, very early third year medical student, I was trying to arrange some research, and I was gravitating towards the hepatobiliary surgeons. And I landed up in the M&M conference as I was waiting to talk to one of the attendings. Now, mind you, I had already had basic medical knowledge, but I'm sitting there. I remember vividly, they were talking about segmental liver anatomy, and I had no idea what they were talking about. It was like I hadn't even taken gross anatomy. And then they were talking about a patient with an ileus, and ileus had just never been mentioned in the first couple of years of medical school. And I was sitting there like, my God, I have no idea what these people are talking about. And I think when it comes to personal finance and investing, the terms that are thrown around are deliberately made to sound confusing. So you hear people talk about capital markets and basis points and equity and fixed income and the S&P 500 and NASDAQ, Dow Jones, and defined contribution plans. All these words are completely intimidating, but on purpose. Um, and so doctors don't have the basic knowledge. We don't have a high school class typically about this. We don't even learn it in college. And so the tendency is to think, God, this stuff is complicated. I'm just going to pay somebody to take care of this for me. And financial professionals, I don't want to make out like they're all out to get us, but they profit tremendously from our ignorance. And so we're like sitting ducks.
Mhm.
And so even though we're very smart, the tendency is to think that it's complicated and just let someone else handle it at our peril.
Hmm. Well, that's concerning. Do you think that, okay, so it's obvious that the system was made more complex than it needs to be in order to profit. Do you think that we are intimidated by the need to spend time to learn about something that people have an assumption we should know about? Or is it truly that we don't feel that we are adequate to manage our own money? What?
I think it's more the first problem. I mean, listen, everybody's different, but based on the conversations I've had with people about this, there is an assumption that this is, in order for me to master this world of that seems so opaque, I'm gonna have to spend a ton of time.
Mhm.
And it really isn't the case. My experience is that I sort of joke that I've read 5 more books than the average person on this topic, and I'm a so-called expert. I mean, really, if you dig deep enough, my knowledge sort of ends. But if you go on vacation and you read for enjoyment, maybe one vacation you bring a couple of books with you, and truly, the most incredible thing about this topic is you only need to know a few main points in order to prevent yourself from getting completely ripped off. So, for example, I'm not my sort of motivation here is to empower people to understand they can go it alone, but even if they do want to pay a financial professional to help them, that they know just enough to not get completely screwed.
Well, that's important too, to have that radar of this doesn't seem right. And I have a baseline of knowledge to know that it doesn't feel right. So let me dig deeper before I sign up.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, can you give us a few just basics of the financial markets and maybe some of the benefits?
Yeah. So one of the most basic things that you need to understand, and listen, this is a topic of debate, but there's two main strategies in investing. One is called active investing, and the other is called passive investing. The market is going to do its thing. Okay, sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. Generally, over time, it goes up. Passive investing just says, I'm going to equal whatever the market does. I'm going to be average. Whatever that graph of the market returns is, I'm going to be right on the line. I'm not going to be better. but I'm not going to be worse. That's called passive investing. It happens to be the cheapest way to do it. And the punchline is it's the best way for most people. Now, active investing is an attempt to beat the market. So you're going to entrust a professional who, say, runs a fund that you're going to invest in. And that professional is so smart that they are going to pick the best stocks and beat the market. So this is one basic fact, that there are two camps. Mm-hmm. Now, you could look at it. I love using an analogy. So there's a classic analogy about a casino where an active investing approach would be like, you want to be a professional gambler. Okay. And you know all the odds, you have an incredible memory, you see the cards go by and you can sort of almost predict what the next card is going to be and try to beat the casino and come out with a wad of money. Or you can be the casino itself and own the house. And some tables go hot, some tables go cold, but no matter what, you sort of own the whole thing. That's passive investing. And as it turns out, passive investing wins about 85 to 90% of the time. And it's very comforting and a huge relief once you realize this, because the stress of it all goes away. You're not wondering if you have access to some super top secret tip that only certain people know. You're just trying to be the house. So that's part of the basics that I like people to know.
Well, I love that analogy of either being the house or being the gambler. That makes complete sense. Now, how do you think, well, in the past couple of years / decade, there have become these like Robo Advisors, right? You can set it and forget it, and the algorithm does it. How do you think that's going to change with AI now coming into these markets? It's not something that, it may change just how people invest. Because I think what you're saying is the bottom line is you can't just make money. You have to invest that money for later, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, the question about AI is so interesting. The Robo Advisors, like most things in this topic, it depends. But there are some Robo Advisors that the foundation is index investing, which is the same thing as passive investing. An index is something like the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ or the Dow Jones Industrial Average. These are benchmarks of market return. And index funds just try to match whatever those indices are doing. And so Robo Advisors, some of them are based on index and passive investing. And I think those are great for most people. I'm not really sure how AI is going to impact this space. I'm sure people are already crafting chatbots that are in the background AI fueled, that can have probably very realistic conversations with most investors to try to get at what is your risk tolerance, how long do you have for a time horizon for your investments. Okay, here's what we recommend you do with your money. I mean, that's I haven't looked into it. I'm sure something like that already exists.
Well, we'll keep our eyes open. The world is changing. Well,
absolutely.
If we talk about some of the most common mistakes that people make, what would you say some of them are?
The most common mistake that people make is not paying attention to fees. Okay, that's mistake number one. And again, I know I sound totally cynical when I say this, but this is probably done on purpose. Someone will say, I'll manage your money for 1% of assets under management. So whatever big pot of money you give me, I'm the professional. I'll manage it for you. You're a busy doctor. You worry about doctoring and I'll worry about your money. And all I'm going to charge you is 1%. That sounds very low. right? I mean, 1% sounds low. As it turns out, when you crunch the numbers, 1% is massively high. And the reason is we talked about compound interest previously, this awesome curve that looks like it's sort of a hockey stick looking curve, where early on it looks like not much is happening and it gets very exciting later on. That's because the money you put in is earning interest, and the interest each year also earns interest. And so if you scoop off 1% of that every year, it's like you're stunting the growth of that tree massively. And so let me give you a rough example.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of my favorite examples to give when I give a lecture about this. Let's say you invest $15,000 a year. By the way, that was the 403B limit in 2008 when I crunched these numbers. But
Okay.
you're going to increase that amount by 2% every year
Mhm.
with inflation. And the market is going to do what the market is going to do. And then over 30 years later, let's just say the market does reasonably well. You end up with $3 million with this paradigm.
Okay.
1% fee on that is $630,000. $630,000. Now, most doctors are going to be investing more than $15,000 a year, and so this is just an illustrative example. I'm not trying to suggest that that's all you should invest. I'm just trying to explain. You forego over $600,000. Now, if I say to you 1%,
Mhm.
that sounds low. If I say to you, give me $630,000 to manage your money, you would look at me like I was totally crazy.
Right.
Okay. Even 0.5% fee is very high. What we want to try to do is to keep our fees less than 0.2%, certainly less than 0.3%. That's called 30 basis points, and even better, under 0.2%. Once you realize this, you should not make this mistake, because this is one of the things that you can control. You can control what fees you pay. And this is not just paying financial professionals. Every time you invest in a fund, it'll tell you what the fee is. It's called an expense ratio. And if it's something like 0.75% or 0.8 or even 1%, a red flag should go off. Holy cow, that's ridiculously expensive. But we have no frame of reference. If you go to the supermarket, you know what's expensive and what's not. If you look at a fund menu, you have no idea unless you learn the basics. So that's mistake number one.
Well,
Any questions about that one?
no, but it kind of, well, I guess I do have a question about that. So, does it make a difference if your portfolio is growing or if it's shrinking? Do they still receive the same percentage of fees, or does it typically fluctuate? So, if I'm losing money, am I still paying them 1%?
Yes, that's right on the money. Okay, so isn't that ridiculous? Whether your portfolio goes up or down, it doesn't matter. The person managing your money or the fund manager in the fund you've invested in gets their fee no matter what. No matter what. It's somewhat ludicrous. But I think just armed with this one little piece of information, that 1% is a ton of money over time. I think, again, this is a perfect example of how you can prevent yourself from getting fleeced over time.
Agree. Because it's difficult. I mean, how can we predict the future of the markets? Like, how do we know?
Yes, you don't know. That's it exactly. So that's a perfect segue to mistake number two. Mistake number two, and I almost made this mistake a couple of elections ago. But mistake number two is trying to time the market. Okay. So let's talk about what that means. Market timing is a strategy of trying to predict the best times to buy or sell an investment based on whatever the market seems to be doing in the short term. But as it turns out, timing the market accurately is extremely challenging, even for very experienced investors or financial professionals. And so this has been proven time and time again that essentially it's not possible. It's certainly not possible for us mere mortal doctors. I can tell you that. The best thing to do is to just be invested, period, not pull your money out. So, for example, I don't want this to become a political conversation, but let's just say in a previous election that was a shocking election, I called my father and I said, Dad, I know I give this talk on personal finance and investing, but I'm considering pulling out to cash because this seems like a crazy moment in history and the markets are going to crash. And long story short, I didn't do that, thank God. And the market rallied and went up. So you just can't predict. And one of my favorite things to share with people is this concept of missing the best days. Okay. So if you take a 20-year period, say from January 1st, 2001 to December 31st, 2020, as it turns out, there are 5,040 trading days in that 20-year period, 5,040 days. If you miss just the 10 best days in those 5,040 days, your returns are cut in half. So as it turns out, the market did about, I think, 7.5 or 8% over those 20 years. And if you missed the 10 best days only, your returns were cut in half to like 3.5%. If you missed the 30 best days, you basically have 0% return. And so what's incredible about that is the market moves in fits. It's not like a steady line. It has these rebound days with really fantastic returns. And if you're not in it and you miss those days, you totally mess up your eventual return. So once you accept this fact, it's also a stress reliever because whatever noise is happening out there in the financial news and the financial press, and you open up your favorite newspaper and the Fed is announcing something about interest rates and the market is going berserk and some company does something nefarious and goes bankrupt and the market collapses or whatever it is. We can't predict what the next market crash is going to be, although there definitely will be one. It's comforting to know that, okay, I heard this podcast with Jennifer and Dave one time. They said I should just hold steady. I'm just going to hold steady. That's all. That's what you need to do. It's a stress reliever.
It is, but I don't want to be average. What can I do to be better than average?
Right, exactly. You don't want to be average because in your professional life, you're certainly not average. And I think, I would just like to compliment all urologists are, why did we go into urology? Because we were enamored with urology mentors. And now those are our colleagues. What a group of incredible, accomplished, interesting people, right? But we also want to be above average when it comes to investing. It's a trap. It's not just urologists, it's most smart professionals. We fall for this trap of thinking that because we're maybe above average in life, we're somehow owed some kind of boutique, special, secret investing product like a hedge fund, for example. And we're enticed by cocktail party banter where, oh, a friend of mine's got this person, their practice is closed, but maybe I can get you in. They have this incredible hedge fund that I can get you in, and it's killing the market. Just to use hedge funds as an example, these often have very complex structures and promises of beating the market. But the reality is that most hedge funds fail completely and go bankrupt. And on average, do worse than the market. There are some that beat the market, but the chance that you find that one is nearly zero. So again, in a doctor's quest to be above average in investing, they end up coming out well below average. So if you can just remember, stick to index funds that aim only to match whatever the market does. Being average in this particular sphere of your life means winning completely.
So that makes complete sense. So if I think about the opportunities that are ahead of, like before me, the ones that aren't with significant risk, how do I maximize what I'm able to do now while minimizing that risk?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that for most urologists is going to be that you're going to have an employer sponsored workplace savings plan, and every month when you get your paycheck, you'll contribute to that. To that plan. So it could be like a 403b or a 401k, and you can set up something similar even if you own your own practice. And for each one of these types of plans, there's rules about what the maximum contribution is every year, and you should try to maximize the contribution to those plans. And again, it's a question of, if you do that from the beginning and you're not used to that money landing in your bank account, you don't consider it part of your spending money, and so
Mhm.
you get you set your expenses below that. You never see it, and so it doesn't bother you. Now, here's another common mistake to fold into this conversation here.
Mhm.
Since I've had the privilege of giving this talk to dozens of urology groups around the country, I'll ask somebody, so are you invested in your workplace retirement plan? And they'll say, yeah. I say, well, what are you invested in? They say, oh, I'm in the 403b. Okay, well, what are you invested in? Oh, the 403b. The most common mistake here is people miss the fact that that's just the name of the overall account, and you have to pick something from a menu inside that account. It's hugely important. If you don't, there's always a fund that you will get defaulted into. They won't let you not make a choice, so they'll choose for you, and often, I'm sorry to say, it'll be an expensive, actively managed fund.
Mm.
So this would be sort of like saying, what surgery are you doing today? Oh, I'm doing pelvic surgery. Well, what operation are you? Well, I don't know. I'm just doing pelvic surgery. We would never say something like that. So doctors need to approach this with the same care and precision and attention to detail that they do uh, all of their surgical endeavors.
So I completely agree. But how do I balance? I mean, prior generations, the cost of medical school was different. Now the costs are astronomical. So if I'm a resident or I'm a new attending, how do I balance putting away money for retirement, living, and then also paying off the student loan debt that I may have?
Yeah, I mean, that is an excellent question. I think it's even more apropos given the fact that we're in a rising interest rate environment.
Mhm.
I think about the neighborhoods around the hospital where I work that were accessible to me as a young attending, that now for young staff are much harder to stomach from a financial standpoint, with higher housing prices and higher interest rates. Um, it can be a real struggle. And then you bring up student loans. It can be very challenging to balance paying off student loans and saving for retirement, but it really is important to prioritize both.
Mhm.
Obviously, people need to at least pay the minimum payments on their student loans while also contributing to retirement savings, because of that compound interest curve that I talked about, where you need to take advantage of those early years If student loan interest rates are high and you can't consolidate them to a lower rate, you sort of have to consider paying them off more aggressively. On the other hand, if interest rates are very low and they were locked in before rates rose, you have the potential to prioritize retirement savings over student loan repayment. I want to give us a plug here for Jim Dolly's blog at the White Coat Investor.
Mhm.
The real purpose of this podcast is to whet your appetite. And if this is something that you have become interested in as a listener, Jim Dolly's blog is an excellent rabbit hole to go down, where he has some beautifully written and very well considered articles on this very topic. So I'll leave it at that for the purpose of our discussion, because it really depends on somebody's details.
Okay. And thanks for that reference. Yeah, that is a great website with a lot of information and a lot of comments too that you can learn a lot from. So I've done everything that you said. I've minimized my fees. I started to put money into my employer's 403B when I was an intern. How much do I need? When do I know I can retire?
That's probably the question that everybody is wondering. How much do I need to retire? There's a lot of factors that go into it. How old you are now, when you expect to retire, how much you've saved so far, what you think the market's going to do, and importantly, what your expenses are now and what you expect them to be in retirement. For example, most people will try not to carry a mortgage payment into retirement, and so might project what their spending will be, and it'll be lower than what it is now. It also depends on any pension payments that you may have, your expected Social Security benefit, things like that. But nobody wants to hear it depends. I've heard a lot of doctors say that they need 5 to 10 million to retire, and you might say, my God, that's like a ridiculously broad range.
Right.
And I'm not saying that like an absolute number. There may be people whose expenses are low enough to retire with 1 million, but it depends on how much you anticipate spending every month and how long you're going to live, etc. But what's interesting about that 5 to 10 million that doctors like to say is that if you actually look at how many doctors achieve that benchmark of having a $5 million plus nest egg by the time they retire, it's a small percentage.
Mhm.
So there was a Medscape survey about this, where they polled people about their net worth at a certain age, and 1 out of 5 doctors have a net worth over 5 million by age 70. Now, that's their net worth. So that's not necessarily their retirement savings. I bet a lot of that is, the value of their house, which they're just counting as part of their net worth, but it's not really as liquid as, say another account that you may have. And just to circle back to Jim Dolly again, he had this blog where he said, just for interest's sake, if we look at that 5 million eventual nest egg, whether that's right or wrong, let's just talk about 5 million. How much should you have saved by a certain age to get to that 5 million by retirement? And it's something like this. By age 40, you would have had to have just around 420,000 as part of your nest egg. By age 45, just shy of $1 million. By age 50, 1.6 million. By age 55, 2.5 million. By age 60, 3.6 million, to get to 5 million by age 65. And of course, it depends on what the market does and blah, blah, blah. But the point here is, a lot of doctors don't get to that threshold that they perhaps wanted to. And I think a lot of it is because of the mistakes that we've covered today.
Yes. Well, Thank you for that data. I mean, I think all of us are always searching for what should I have, and it's difficult to compare to someone else because, like you said, there's no. It always depends.
Always.
Personal finance is personal for a reason. So since we don't know everyone's background, I think that was very, very helpful. Well, what else should I do or consider? So I'm thinking about retirement, I'm thinking about my health, potential death, disability. How can I plan for that?
Yeah, so it's very important to plan for things that we hope don't happen, like disability or death before retirement, especially if you have dependents who rely on your income.
Mhm,
So let's talk about um, early death. All right, it's very important that people have a life insurance policy.
mhm,
Um, there's two broad types of life insurance: whole life insurance and term life insurance. Just to make it easy, and because this applies to nearly everyone, you should get term life insurance and not whole life insurance. If I'm going to make a blanket statement, it should be
mhm,
term insurance because it's cheaper and it satisfies nearly everyone's needs. The problem with whole life insurance, again, goes back to fees. They're incredibly expensive. You're enriching the insurance broker
mhm,
probably far more than you're helping yourself with whole life insurance. And because people like to hear numbers, I'll just tell you broadly, most urologists probably, and don't take this as hard and fast advice, but probably have anywhere from $3 to $5 million in term life insurance,
mhm,
which should be able to be obtained cheaply. The younger you get it, before you have medical problems, the easier it is to get. So as soon as possible, get a policy. It should be relatively cheap, and it just becomes part of your monthly expenses. When it comes to disability, and I like to point out here, this is one of my mistakes. I haven't avoided every mistake here, and
mhm,
so I just want to share a little personal anecdote. I did not get my own disability insurance policy before I ruptured a couple of discs in my back, and now it's almost impossible to insure myself without these ridiculous exclusions. So as soon as possible, you should get what's called own occupation coverage. So if you, God forbid, have a disability, you don't want them to say, well, all right, you can't do surgery, but you can be an office-based urologist just fine. So sorry, keep working. Um, you want a very specific policy that says that you can't keep doing exactly what you're doing now. Um, so that's something that should be on everybody's checklist as soon as possible.
And I think for women too, I think we need to look for gender neutral policies. Um, the data suggests that women will file for disability more than men, especially around the time of pregnancy, things like that. And I know that in the past, there were some products, let's say that way, that may have had additional biases. So definitely own OC, which means own occupation. And then I think women should look for gender neutral. So, all right. So now I'm going to put you on the spot. I want to create a portfolio that's going to maximize my profit and minimize my risk. What should I do? What should I allocate? Stocks, bonds, like what should I consider?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked that because people think, most people think that your success eventually, once all said and done, and you've got a lot of gray hair and you're about to retire, depends on which stocks you picked
Mhm.
or which funds you picked. Did you pick the winners or did you pick the losers? And it's actually not that way. Almost all of your success is determined by what's called asset allocation, which is how much you put in stocks and how much you put in bonds.
Okay.
So, of all the decisions that you make, this is one that deserves careful attention. Now, you put me on the spot, how much should I put in stocks and bonds? And I'm going to tell you, it is incredibly, I can tell you what I do, but it's incredibly individual. Why? Because we each have different risk tolerance. If we all went to the local pool, to the high diving board, and we all stood in line, and some people would just not jump off, and other people would jump off very carefully, and some crazy lunatics would do a front flip. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I can't say, well, listen, I do a front flip, so you should do a front flip. I mean, you've got different DNA than I do. So if you Google risk tolerance calculator, you'll get a whole bunch of pages, and they're all variations on a theme. But I would encourage listeners to go through this exercise
Mm-hmm.
and really do some soul searching. But it involves doing something like this. It'll say, in the effort to earn high returns, how much are you willing to watch your portfolio drop in 1 year? Like, are you willing to let it drop 30% in 1 year? If so, you could do, for example, 90% stocks, 10% bonds. If you are not willing to see that kind of drop, maybe it's more like 70-30 or 60-40. And
Mm-hmm.
so you can't borrow someone else's asset allocation, because really your own genetic composition and tolerance of risk is going to be unique. So just to bring this point home, when the market crashes, nobody's happy. I mean, let's be honest. Nobody's happy when the market drops by 15 or 20% in 1 year. But the people who are really freaking out probably have gotten this question wrong. They put more in stock than they truly were willing to stomach. So the answer is, do some soul searching and get this question right. It's gonna tilt slowly in favor of bonds as you get older. But if you get this right and it matches with your own risk tolerance, then again, we call this topic financial wellness for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
If we get our asset allocation right and we're invested in index funds, we don't care what is happening on CNBC with the crazy talking heads about the news. We set this whole thing on autopilot, and we're not stressed. We can put all of our energy into worrying about more important things than this.
Thank you. Thank you for that reassurance. Set it, move on. Thank you, Dr. Cans, for sharing your time and expertise with us today.
You're very welcome. I appreciate the invitation. This was really fun.
I thank you really, because this is going to be very, very helpful for all of our listeners out there. And thank you to our audience for joining us on the AUA Leadership and Business Podcast. Until next time.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, make AUA Leadership and Business your go-to podcast. Subscribe today by searching AUA Leadership and Business on your favorite podcast app and enhance your leadership and business education needs.